So good morning and welcome to the Singular Health Group Ltd investor webinar. My name is Jay Morgan, the Investor and Media Relations Manager, and today I am joined by our Managing Director and CEO, Thomas Hanley. Today we'll be providing investors with an overview of the company's achievements for the past 6 months, as well as conducting a Q&A session. So to ask a question throughout today's presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Tom, I'll hand over to you to provide a company update.
Thank you, Jane. And thank you for everyone who's joined the webinar today. So look, just very briefly, Singular Health is a company that was listed back 2 years ago and focuses on taking CT and MRI scans, converting them into 3D, and then using that 3D imagery for either better surgery planning or for 3D printing of implants and other devices. So it is available on Windows, iOS, Android, and Mac. So just very quickly, that sort of gives you a bit of a background of the company, what we've done over the last 6 months. We've achieved our inaugural clearance of our 3-DICOM MD product. A product, as I said before, works on all those different modalities, takes a standard CT MRI scan, converts that into 3D, and that allows surgeons to better do surgical planning or provide that better patient education and discussion between clinician and patient. The fact that it's now FDA cleared in the United States means that we can now promote it as an FDA cleared diagnostic device, as opposed to our other medical software, which is just for sort of research and development and patient education. Along with that, we did our ISO 13485, so we completed our quality management system, and we should have our certification announced later this month. With ISO 13485 came MDSAP. So MDSAP is an additional qualification that allows us to go from FDA and then certify or clear the product with TGA, Health Canada, and Japan. During this process also, we commenced and completed the purchase of another 3D printing facility. So to add on to our 3D printing capability, we have an investment in a 3D printing company in Melbourne that largely focuses on medical 3D printing, and in particular maxillofacial 3D printing. So that's for the 3D implants that go in for surgery around the jaw and the mouth. The 3D printing facility we've acquired here in Perth is a 100% acquisition, which was done purely on script, and will add additional 3D printing services and the ability to 3D print across 2 sites. We also had a number of additional R&D projects working with other companies, which we accrued some revenue for that. And we have been working with enterprise partners, particularly Sony, which we announced last week, looking for that or developing those enterprise relationships that we are building up and changing or tweaking the software to enable them to be integrated into the particular hardware systems. We also lodged our R&D tax refund and received over $400,000 rebate. Our R&D is with the CSIRO and is an ongoing project looking at artificial intelligence and how AI can learn or be trained to take very complex shapes and design them for particular cranial implants. So the cranium is a very, very complex shape, and this AI tool takes a process that will normally take 3 hours to design down to about 3 minutes. And that's something that we've also been working with companies like Osteopore based in Singapore and Protomed based in Sri Lanka. There's a few other things we also did. We're also looking to divest our GOVR joint venture with our partner. So they're looking to acquire our balance of 50% and enable us to support the software, but not focus on the exploration and mining side of the application. So that's an ongoing process that we have at the moment as well. Thank you, Jane.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Tom. And again, shareholders can send through their questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But Tom, we've had quite a few pop up already, so
Okay.
I'll jump into them. So could you please talk about why 3D printing is a natural fit for the medical industry?
Sure. So, there's been a lot of buzz about 3D printing, both in the materials and the equipment space. And most of that buzz has been around sort of industrial 3D printing, but that sort of competes with sort of standard industrial processes. So the ability to generate significant revenue or margin from that is difficult in anything other than medical. And with medical, the 3D printing space allows for those very patient-specific implants to be designed. So instead of taking something off the shelf and trying to customize it and bend and fit it into a patient, the ability to use a CT scan, to use our software to view that in 3D and then design an implant that can be 3D printed is something that is just a natural fit. First of all, it's a natural fit because of the margin is significant in the printing space. You can invest in quite sophisticated 3D printing technologies because the margin exists. But secondly, you get a far better healing or far better recovery process with patients whose implants or prosthetics or orthotics fit exactly to their specific requirements and not something that's off the shelf.
Thanks, Tom. You're going to have to forgive me. I'm going to be jumping around a bit here, but could you please provide more information on the company's commercialization strategy for the US market, given that there has been a change in the US medtech landscape?
So look, we have a in-house regulatory expert that works with us. When we filed for our FDA 510K approval for our 3DICOM MD software, we had to jump through all those new regulatory hoops. The US market is a challenging market because, as opposed to an area or a country that has a sort of an integrated, centralized medical system, the US has a very fragmented medical system. Everything, is down to not just individual state level, which is also individual regulations, but also down to individual cities. And so, obviously, from our point of view, to look to commercialize our software in that space, we've partnered with different companies in order to do that. And the first one we partnered with is a company called Colenium, based in the United States. So they're acting as they've been appointed as a US agent, which is required for a company who's developed something and is at FDA approved. Secondly, enterprise partners. So our first enterprise partner for release of the software is Sony. And that was an announcement we made last week. This week, they are, launching their new SRD screen, our spatial reality display, which basically takes a display, and instead of having to put on the virtual reality headset that we have developed for as well, you don't need that to get the full immersive image. It almost lifts the image off the screen and gives you that complete 3D immersive image without having to have the headset. So this is a big push for Sony into that health space. We are the only 3D medical provider for Sony for the US market. And so once they make their launch later this week, we do plan an engagement with Sony and a marketing plan with Sony to market our product in conjunction with them into different hospitals, health groups, HMOs, those sort of things in the US market.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry, just back to the FDA approval. So can you please explain on the FDA approval and what it allows the company to do in the US and what other approvals are required for the rest of the world?
So, so the FDA clearance, it's a 510K FDA clearance 2A, basically allows surgeons, clinicians, physicians to use the software for a diagnostic capability. So they can, instead of the warning that goes up on most software applications in the medical space that aren't cleared, which says, use this device at your risk. It is not medically cleared. Our device is medically cleared, which means that a doctor or a hospital can buy the application and use that to work with patients to do a better, to have improved surgical planning, and know that the software has that sort of tick of clearance from the FDA. So to sort of elevate, it kind of elevates our software from where most of the software applications exist in this space, and that is without FDA clearance, and it elevates that to sort of the limited number of applications that have that. Remembering as well that our software works on both Windows and Mac. So the importance here is that very, very few software applications are FDA cleared and work on both devices. That was the first part of your question.
Yes. So the second part is, so what other markets?
So in order to gain FDA clearance, we had to go through our ISO 13485 accreditation. This is the ISO 9000 quality management system for medical devices. So we went through a very strenuous process over the last, in that last 6-month period to gain ISO 13485 clearance. We had the audit, we had the second audit. It's been cleared as an ISO 13485 manufacturer of medical devices, which software is one. and we're about to receive the certification this week. Once we receive the certification and the fact that we've also applied for MDSAP as part of the ISO 13485, it'll allow us to lodge them with the TGA, with Health Canada, with Japan and a couple of other countries. The only other region which is really complicated and different to the rest of the world is Europe. And that's a much more sort of long-term approach.
Thank you, Tom. That answered the next question. So can you please provide an update on the R&D activities?
Yeah, so the R&D activity, and there's a really, really good video of this on our YouTube channel, but basically we've been working with the CSIRO on using artificial intelligence and machine learning to take our software and add an algorithm which designs a cranial implant. So the first cab off the rank it was look, the cranium is a really complex shape. There are surgeries that go on all the time, whether that's because someone's been in a severe accident or has had cancer and removed a big chunk of their cranium. And so an implant needs to be designed and fitted. Sometimes that implant has to be sort of cut into shape, but what we've been able to do is design an AI tool that segments the skull and then generates that AI straight to a 3D printing process. So those are the kind of research projects that we're now working on to sort of develop more and more of those AI tools that help design implants or orthotics or prosthetics for patients that can be 3D printed. And as part and parcel of that, we're putting all that into a cloud-based platform. So our software can talk straight to our cloud-based AI platform and generate those AI design implants and prosthetics. Further down the line, obviously, there's a lot of conversation around whether or not AI should be used for diagnostics. We ran an R&D team internally to look at the ability to recognize lung cancer at a very early stage within certain patients. And we designed an AI tool to sort of look for that sort of early stage lung cancer, which was very successful. But at this point, it's something that's sort of an ongoing research project.
Thank you, Tom. Jumping around again. So while the company remains focused on the enterprise sales approach, can you just provide a little bit more of an update on how the direct-to-consumer business is tracking?
Sure. So that's a really good question. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 6 months developing what we call, I guess, the peripheral elements of the software, allowing people to license, download, and manage the software, manage their scan. So a really big part of what we've had to do is sort of almost create an ecosystem for the transfer and management of DICOM, CT and MRI scans, something that has been very sort of rudimentarily done in the past with things like CD-ROMs. We had sort of get past that and design systems that enable the transfer of that data that is HIPAA compliant, which means that it has to be secure, it has to be anonymized, so that obviously there's no patient leak. But once that's done, and once we're able to transfer that data, that becomes a very big part of the sort of individual license element, because those people are looking to sort of somehow not just download the software, but get their scan onto the software. So our platform was launched in December, and already we have 380 paying clients that have used that. So we've kind of minimized, we've only just turned on some of the search engine and Google AdWords, so that we've kept the number of users to a point where we're able to sort of find any sort of additional tweaks and changes that we had to make. And over the next few months, we're ramping up the Google AdWords and ramping up. But the great thing is that the software is selling across all three different types: MD, R&D, and patient, and all over the world, right? So we're getting USA, Brazil, Egypt, the UK, Australia, Japan, and then this is not something that's just specific to one particular country. We've been very successful in getting this out to quite a large part of the world.
Thanks again, Tom. So can you provide an update on how the divesting interest in GeoVR is coming along?
Sure. So we entered an agreement last year with our JV partner to look at the divestment of GeoVR. They went through a due diligence process. That DD process is ongoing, and we hope to have a finalization of that next month. They had to pay a $10,000 payment in order to continue to do the DD process past the original date. But yeah, that's going on quite well. So we hope to have that announcement on that around April.
The next one. So can you please elaborate on the importance of Asia as a market for software and 3D printing?
Yeah, so Asia is one of those really interesting markets where, it's got a growing middle class. You've got a very sort of a younger, more, I guess, a younger clinical medical base of practitioners. And so they're always looking for something that's more innovative, easier to use. Whereas sometimes when you're dealing with very mature countries, getting your technology into those countries has been more difficult, more challenging, because you've had to go through a lot more steps. Just in the past, we've had a company, for example, in Sri Lanka, use the software to do the design work and then match the design with their manual design process for cranial implants. So these are the sort of applications that are being used at the moment. Obviously, we've been working with Osteopore, and while Osteopore is an ASX listed company, they are based in Singapore. Their material, which is a different kind of material for cranial implants, enables bone regeneration back into that material, which means that the 3D printing process is very different for them. And it meant that the AI that we then designed for them specifically, which we've done with Osteopore, had to take into consideration the special elements of their particular material as it was being 3D printed. So these are the sort of things and approaches into Asia that make us really excited about where the software is going to go into that particular market. We have been working in Macau with a hospital in Macau, and we should hopefully have quite a significant order of software from them in the next couple of months as well. Yeah, and in terms of 3D printing, again, this is sort of the extension of the software. The software gives you the visualization, it gives you the design elements, but the 3D printing then allows you to 3D print those things in a way that is very, very patient specific. And it's one of those areas of technology and medicine that is becoming more and more important, because as you get a better and better implant, you get a much better health recovery. And these are sort of things that I think make Asia a very interesting market for us.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to try and group these ones all together because they are about Sony. But first up, can you please elaborate on what the recently announced deal with Sony could mean for revenue?
Right. Well, as I mentioned before, so Sony have developed their SRD screen. It's a spatial reality display screen, which gives you that sort of full immersive 3D without having to put the VR headset on. So it's a very exciting extension of our software, because when we first developed our software, we had it designed specifically for virtual reality, but that VR headsets were very, very hard to sell into hospitals. So that the fact that Sony has come up with a display, which is no bigger than a sort of 14-inch computer monitor, means that this sort of fully immersive technology could be more and more adopted by hospitals. And for us, we are the sole software provider for 3D design and 3D diagnostics of CT and MRI scans with Sony in the United States. And the reason they picked us was for three reasons. The first one is we had FDA clearance, which means they can sell our software into the hospital. Secondly, our software runs across multiple devices. And thirdly, our software is a local device or local product. A couple of the other 3D viewers work off a Windows-based system in the cloud as opposed to being on the device, whereas our software is on the device itself. And that made it very important for Sony to sort of work with us, because that's the only way this SID screen works. They've got a big launch coming up this week with the Orthopedic Society of the United States. And then we'll work with them jointly on a marketing plan for the US market. So we do see this as our first sort of major enterprise deal. And with their marketing clout, this will be a significant improvement in our software sales at the enterprise level.
Thanks for that, Tom. You actually answered all the questions that are coming up based on that. So I'll leave those ones there.
Terrific.
Okay, so how does the Scan to Surgery initiative include 3D printing? And what is the importance of controlling the end-to-end vertically integrated process by owning the 3D printing facilities?
Yeah, that's so the importance. So obviously, when we sort of sat down and first designed what we call the Scan to Surgery, we wanted to be as ubiquitous as possible. In other words, we wanted to make sure that when people had a CT scan or an MRI, it was using a standard CT and MRI machine. When it was being reviewed on a computer, it can be reviewed on a Mac or a Windows device or whatever. And then you get to the design of the implant and then the surgery. The design of the implant and the 3D printing are really that sort of next step in that vertically integrated process. And really, what we see as having kind of the best of both worlds in this effect is that we've got software, which is very, very scalable. But as a lot of people know, software can sometimes, is challenging from a margin point of view. And then we have 3D printing, and the margins in 3D printing for medical are significant. So by having both those elements as part of our vertically integrated process means we can both have a scalable product and a product with a fair degree of margin. Secondly, the importance is that when you have ISO 13485, you want to, that quality management system, you want to have as much control as possible through that quality management process and through the process going from scan to 3D printing. So the more that we can control, the more we can ensure that the final end product is exactly what the client's looking for, the patient's looking for.
Thanks, Tom. Just further to that then. So on the scan to surgery business, what number of parts per week or month are you scanning?
Oh, gosh. Okay. So I'll change that to how many parts a month we are printing across both our 3D printing facility. That's a challenging question. So just to give you a sort of background, we have a share. We own a share in a 3D printing facility in Melbourne, a company called Additive Engineering, and they print dozens per week of maxillofacial implants. So these are implants that are used for things like sleep apnea, for things like jaw correction, for things like people who have serious conditions and have cancer and have bone that needs replacing, whether it's in the mandible or whether it's in the maxilla. These are sort of areas that these guys are 3D printing. They're also 3D printing a lot of biomodels. So when you come to a surgery of that sort of extent, sometimes what the surgeon's looking for is an exact replica of what they're looking at from the skull point of view as 3D printed. And we're printing dozens of those a week. When it comes to our facility in Perth, which we've just purchased, that one is more focused on prosthetics, orthotics, and soon to be sleep apnea devices. So far, we're printing about 10 a week in terms of the orthotics prosthetic space, but that is before we have launched, we've acquired a vapor fusing device, and that vapor fusing device will finish the product so that it looks like it has been literally vacuum produced. So it's going to be completely smooth as opposed to having sort of those ridges that you normally see with a 3D printed product. So we expect to scale up the Perth facility over the next couple of months to something in the order of sort of 50 to 100 devices a month.
Just sticking with the machines actually now. So how many 3D printing machines do you currently have, and in which states?
Yeah, so in Melbourne, we have 3 titanium 3D printers, and we have 3 SLS polymer 3D printers. So the SLS polymer 3D printers are largely for biomodels and cutting guides and surgical cutting guides. Whereas the titanium are for your implants. So these are things we just basically straps your face and your jaw back together once you've done the surgery. So we got three titanium in Melbourne and 3 polymer SLS machines in Melbourne. In Perth, we have 2 SLA machines. This is a slightly different process, which means we can focus on different types of 3D printing for medical output. We have a large SLS printer, and we've just and a smaller SLS printer, and we also have now acquired a vapor fuse finishing machine for the Perth market. So this sort of gives us that sort of almost complete sort of coverage of the country, but also coverage of the different areas and types of 3D printing that we've done in the medical space.
Thanks, Tom. Sorry, bear with me. I'm getting emails and questions coming through everywhere. But okay, so how is Singular adopting AI for better patient outcomes, both from an implant design perspective and to improving diagnostics?
That's a great. Okay, so our key focus on AI at the moment, because AI is it's all the sort of hot gossip at the moment. Everyone's sort of talking about ChatGPT and all these sort of things when it comes to AI, and so where we see AI working really, really well is being able to improve the process of design of implants, particularly really, really complex designs. So again, there's coming back, our first AI that the market's sort of seen from us, and the one that's being now tested across different parts of Asia, is our cranial implant AI. And again, that's taking a CT scan of the skull, it turns it into 3D in our software, it segments that into and just segments the bone area, the skull, and then in 3 minutes we can select an AI tool and it will literally design the implant. And you've got to consider shape of the head, you've got to consider thickness of the bone, and you've got to consider all the sort of different ridges and everything in order to keep it exactly consistent. That took over 10,000 scans that we had to use in order to train that AI to understand and use that perfectly well. You then take that design, you then export that as an SLS file, and you can then 3D print that in titanium, into PEEK, into whatever sort of material you need to do in order to then generate it before you then do the surgical process. So that's really an area that's very important to us. We're looking at other areas, whether it's the spinal area where we can use AI to design the spinal implants, or in the sort of maxillofacial and sleep apnea area where we use that. So those are sort of AIs that we're looking to sort of bring in after the success of the first one. In the diagnostic space, we took that really sort of interesting leap where we designed an AI to look at chest scans, CT scans, and look for early stage lesions which could lead to lung cancer. And the idea there obviously is the earlier you catch something, the better the patient outcome is. Now we've spent quite a bit of time on that last year, but what we found is that because of the 3D printing process, the more important AIs for our commercial success have been the ones around the design of implants. The design for diagnostics will come later. This is something that we'll probably do in the next sort of 12 months. One of the important things to realize about AIs is that while they're not that difficult to design, they're really difficult to train. It's the training of the AI that really, and that's the sort of work and support that we've had from the CSIRO and their big data divisions over East, has been able to work with those experts, secure tens of thousands of scans of individual patients in order to train the AI to do what we want it to do. So it's been a really sort of positive area of research for us.
Question is, what are the risks of using the software? Are there controls over the possibilities of operational mistakes when analyzing and planning surgeries?
Yeah, okay, very good question. So what we've done with our software is enabled both a standard two-dimensional display, so seeing the exact CT and MRI slices in 2D, and then enabling a 3D generation from that, but always having on the right side of the screen the two-dimensional images that are naturally generated when you do the CT and MRI scan. So the importance thing here is that obviously we're using CT and MRI technology that has been with the country, been with hospitals for decades, right? We're not changing any of that process at all. Then when it comes to being able to do the 3D display and to do the AI, going through the QMS that we've got there, we have to then train and analyze scan after scan after scan after scan to make sure we then match that with the non-AI generated view in order to make sure that it's consistent. So we've gone through that process. That process has been cleared by the FDA. We now have insurance in the United States to begin selling this, and that's not cheap, I can assure you. But those are the sort of things that those are sort of hoops that we had to jump through in order to secure a client as important as Sony, because obviously they're not going to be promoting a product like this into hospitals and promoting our software if they didn't think that we had both the risk, the compliance, and that sort of whole sort of support process in place for our software.
Thank you, Tom. We've just got time for one more. So I think finally, what opportunities lie ahead for the company in the calendar year? And what is the biggest opportunity in front of Singular Health?
Well, really, there are two big opportunities in front of us at the moment. The first major opportunity is obviously at the enterprise level. So as we are building up the software and as we are now getting that software into the hands of enterprise customers, they're now seeing the ability to integrate our software with either their hardware or other elements of their software that they want to work with. So we've got not just a development team, but we have an integration team as well that enables us to work with those sort of enterprise customers. And as we grow that, our investment that got the software not just on this Mac that I'm working on, and not just on a Windows machine, but also on a device as simple as this. And if this is not cloud generated, this is generated from a CT scan on a mobile phone. And to have that ability just goes to show how important enterprises integration is, because you can imagine that there are companies that we're talking to that, for example, may want to integrate just the mobile element of that application into their mobile integration of a larger client base. So enterprise and the investment that we made into multi sort of devices is really, really important. Secondly, a big area for us that we're going to work through this year, and I think will probably be the single largest contributor to our revenue, will be 3D printing. 3D printing is only at a very, very beginning phase of what is a rapid adoption of 3D printing in the medical space. And it's something that we're going to continue to invest in. It's something our software will integrate with. And we will be looking for more opportunities to invest in other 3D printing companies and platforms over the next 12 months as well.
Wonderful. Well, Tom, that's all we have time for today. And should we have missed any of your questions, please feel free to reach out via the contact details on the bottom of our ASX announcements. But we look forward to hosting you again soon.
Thank you very much, Jane. And thank you very much to those who've been on the call.